All right, Michael Rabasca, always a pleasure to have the opportunity to share some time, kick around some ideas, and share some stories. Let's start off right away with a little bit of a quick introduction. You're kind of unique in the United States. You're the only director of cognitive performance that I know of in professional soccer and one of the few in the U.S. overall in sport. So maybe just give us a couple of highlights of your bio and how you've been lucky enough to end up in this position.
Yeah, well, I started off my academic background is in occupational therapy. I have a bachelor's of science in occupational therapy. Out of college, I spent a good 25, 30 years working with traumatic brain injury, stroke, and especially spinal cord injury. Those were my true passions and love. During that time, I'd always been coaching soccer, kind of parallel from 7 to 5 working in the hospital and then 6 to 10 working on fields with athletes. And it's no, I say this humbly, it took a good 20 years before one day I kind of woke up and said, geez, what I'm doing on the field, I'm kind of doing in the clinic. And from there, just really tried to start formalizing, practices and how I would work with athletes. Getting into the professional sport life has been a bit of a journey, but for the past 11 years, I've spent time with Major League Soccer clubs, Toronto FC and the Los Angeles Galaxy now.
And when you were at Toronto, you did some great things there, but your title then had nothing to do with cognitive performance, right?
So it started off in Toronto as director of cognitive development
Oh,
because
okay.
I was interested in working with the academy athletes, the younger athletes. I also held the title and worked as head coach of our second team in Toronto. And it was really there that I really got to work on the performance end of it and almost felt vindicated because I was in control of the schedule at that time for the second players. So I could really make cognitive performance a priority amongst those athletes. And we had from my standpoint, we had a lot of success with that team and also saw quite a few of those second team players make a formal leap to first team pro career.
That's great. So what were some of the tools? So again, let's timestamp this. That was how long ago?
I left there in 2021, just around the COVID.
Okay. So what were some of the, let's think of it both in terms of strategies slash objectives and tools. And because I'm curious to know how they've evolved over the last 5, 6 years. So when you were there, what were your goals on the cognitive side? And what was your strategy to achieve those goals?
Well, the goals would have been to kind of the big meta goal would have been proof of concept that working on your brain paid dividends, just like working in the gym or on the field, improving technical capacity or improving your physical capacity. So trying to prove that proved, it's still a struggle that I go with today. Um, Constantly trying to find objectivity within this space. So that proved to be difficult. And the only way we were objectifying a lot of stuff is in performance, in wins and losses, or in players, making leaps
Mm.
between
Performance leaps.
and between then first team, second team, like that kind of business. Mainly what I learned when I was in Toronto is the idea of activation or priming and then formal development and how to really approach those two areas in a way that would benefit the athlete. For instance, doing a high cognitive load development type of work before a training session while it has benefits on the brain side, might not have 100, might not have the best benefit when it came time to getting on the field and doing what they're meant to be doing, which is getting better. But in terms of priming or activating and just seeing changes in affect or seeing changes in just instead of requiring our warm up on the field to not only activate their muscles, but to also kind of activate their brain. My subjective feeling was athletes were prepared mentally as soon as the practice started. And that was important
With the addition of the cognitive tools.
with the cognitive tools, whatever those were on that given day. And I would say most of those tools were at the tail end of my time with Toronto FC, we started using some virtual reality, um, specifically NeuroTrainer. The other tools were more manual and things like vision training and meditation and synchronization type tasks that fed into mindfulness, that kind of stuff. So now I think where we hit a broader scope of athletes, like we get more athletes in the room because we're able to deliver. Our tools are a lot more individualized, and they're not so reliant on me having to work with the athlete. So in other words, I can put 5 guys in a virtual reality headset, or we've set up systems and operations that I don't have to be one-on-one with the athlete. I can manage groups, and then we're better off when we go to the field.
So a couple of themes or a couple topics that you raised, this whole concept of proof, of validation, as you said, continues to be a bit of a struggle, right? We've talked about that before. I think the solace is looking back and thinking about how long it took for physical training to become a mainstay, where everybody now agrees if you can increase your physical load and your durability, it's going to make a difference on the court or on the field or on the pitch. And we're still early in that for the cognitive domain. So I'm curious to know, let's talk about your toolbox. What's changed? What have you swapped out? What have you found scales well? Because I think part of the challenge, correct me if I'm wrong, is not just identifying tools that are effective, but also that can be incorporated into workflow and allow you to really scale the program.
Yeah, we what's changed is just in general technology. It's allowed us to scale everything up. I mean, we still work on vision, we still work on psychomotor speed, we still work on executive cognitive function, we're still working in areas of decision making, pattern recognition. These are still there. We've been able to, through tools such as NeuroTrainer, been able to quantify some of the things, at least put numbers on it for the individual athlete. Um, that's helpful to know that maybe their sports vision is improving, at least by the tool that we're using.
Right. By the standard of the tool, right?
By the standard of the tool is correct. Trying to get it to um, how how has it changed their performance on the field is a lot stickier, and that's where I'm laser focused to try and make that happen. I think it's super important for moving forward with the space.
Right. So ideally, we would end up with some sort of dashboard. I think this is what we all envision, a dashboard that has these many different layers. It has a physical layer, it has a cognitive layer, and then we can see how these relate to one another and correlate that to on-field performance. That's the
Yeah,
dream, right?
yeah. I mean, right now, yes, 100%. Right now, I'm with my standardized cognitive tests and visual perception, vision, any kind of cognition. But I can only, right now, I only can use those as an explanation to what I'm observing on the field. And while I can retest and see that we've upticked in these specific areas, um, relating it to on field performance is the next objective.
Right. Any breakthroughs there?
I, we just keep on messing around with AI now. I think we have a better chance of taking our validated standardized tests scores and starting to throw them with some machine learning to see which in-game statistic best reflects, say, for instance, visual perception. Easy to find standardized tests on visual perception, and I can look at all the statistics in the world right now, but I'd just be guessing which one closely reflects that high score on visual perception or low score on visual perception within the in-game.
In terms
Yeah.
of in-game performance.
Yeah. Yeah. But maybe a series of those in-game performance statistics will somehow correlate to one of our standardized assessments.
So then we get into the whole topic of data sets. Right? The bigger the data set, the easier it'll be to find correlation.
Yeah. I mean, in a sense, I think the most popular, and everyone kind of throws it out, is moneyballing it. And we're trying to do that in a sense of, years and years ago, putting value on a player was kind of guesswork, right? You just kind of, you passed the eye test and you kind of went after it. In a sense, sometimes I'm working with coaches and players where we feel like the player is thinking quicker, is processing, is seeing more, scanning more, etc. But that's still an eye test. So being able to find these correlations within the in-game statistics would open up the sport dramatically, because we'd no longer have to do standardized testing. If we have a valid correlation between our current standardized tests with the in-game performance metrics, I could just look across leagues and start saying, yeah, this is a person who processes information quicker than we've seen, or uh, as equal to any of our midfielders, or for a goalkeeper, it's outstanding. You can start to really get after without having to test them, which would be fantastic when it comes to recruitment and
Sure.
scouting.
Sure. What are some of the you mentioned standardized tests a couple of times. I think you've used the Cantab battery or some of the tests in there. What's in your test menu or your collection of tests these days?
We do some tests in risk and impulsivity. We do some, like a gambling test, essentially. We
Okay.
use,
And what is that going to show? What's the correlation here?
well, just simply, if you're a goalkeeper, you probably don't want, this is a gross and general statement. But if you have a goalkeeper, you probably want him to be a little more risk adverse. Like you probably want him to be on the conservative end of a risk scale, whereas maybe if you want him to play on the edge and you want him to be more, a little more of a risk taker, but not in a personality sense, more in the cognitive sense. Calculations that go on inside players' brain all the time. So we'd like a center back, maybe a goalkeeper, to be a little more on the conservative side, and then again, forward, or maybe even a midfielder who's willing to take that or calculate a risk in a different way, that is able to make a line breaking pass.
That's really interesting. So, what if you end up with a player in a role that you would sort of, from an archetype perspective, say, we want moderate risk, but they're a low risk individual? Is there then a way to train them to be able to increase their capacity and appetite for risk?
Yeah, to the extent that we would want that, I suppose it is possible. I mean, we have players right now for sure in our academy who we feel play safe more often than not. Now, again, that's an eye test. If we tested them, the scale should correlate the observation with what we actually are seeing in the test. And right now, we look at those players and we'll put them through exercises to encourage them to take more risk. We'll have them journal about it. We'll have them look at their videotape, and we'll review. Uh, and to the extent that, you know, even something like in neurotrainer, when we get to bonus rounds, players are really careful. Those players can be really careful. So to say to them, to get a high score, you're really going to have to go out on a limb. You're really going to have to go for it.
That's interesting.
And then all of a sudden, like we just had a player yesterday, he hit a high score and blew out everybody inside the room. And he's one of our conservative guys. And we've been just kind of doing all these exercises within Neurotrainer, but also the more one-on-one stuff of journaling and really getting down to the bottom of, why are you playing in reverse a majority of the time? It's not because you're not seeing, because we see you scanning, we see you doing these things. Why are you not doing it? And really, all of this work is where we hope to see the player overcome. So that's a one of the ways we can use some of the standardized tests. Most of the time, the standardized tests are used as a validation of what I think we see, what we're observing, and for coaches to know he is a risk taker. And so he's a risk taker as an outside back. Is knowing that, how are you going to coach him at the professional level? That risk-taking behavior can benefit the team overall. It's not always used as a to improve or to change. Sometimes it's just to know, to
As a
be able
knowledge point.
to be able to explain, to coach better the individual.
That's interesting because I would think that also provides a coach with an opportunity for conditional changes. There's times in a game where you want to put your high appetite for risk players in play, and there are probably times when you want to hold them back. And being able to have those layers of knowledge about players, not just in terms of physical skill, but in terms of their behavioral adaptation, must be really interesting from a coach perspective.
Yeah, to the extent they look at the data and it kind of sometimes makes sense. Sometimes it's not beneficial for them to know it, to just keep on going with their own observations. In the back, we being the performance coaches, can try and work toward improving or not changing, but just somehow coaching the coaches and also coaching the player in the right direction.
It's a lot of coaching. It's a lot of teaching, right? Along the way, teaching the athletes, getting them to understand what you're doing, and then a whole nother layer of getting the coaches to buy in and having them embrace the work. So you mentioned journaling a couple times. I think that's so interesting. So part of the underlying strategy is to really develop more metacognition, to have the players self-actualize in the process.
I would say a cornerstone of our programming would be awareness. So awareness, not only in the game sense, our coaches are big on, were you aware of everything going on in this specific moment? Opponents, teammates, tempo of the game conditions. That's one end of it. But then for the player also, there's this awareness of, was their decision impacted by their current emotion, their current state, whole load of things going on inside that. And the only way to really get after it a little bit is to debrief yourself and to really take a close look at why a decision is made or not made, or how you were specifically feeling at the time. Super important. It's why we strongly believe in meditation and specifically mindfulness, because we feel like mindfulness is one of the better meditation tools for learning and to develop this kind of awareness that we're getting at with the players.
I'd love to hear more about that. As a mindfulness practitioner, teacher for several decades, it's interesting to start to hear more sports teams. It's happening in the military, more inclusion of mindfulness practices. What does that look like? I'm curious to know, is that live, meaning you have teachers come in and introduce it? Are you using digital tools? How receptive are players? What's the
Yeah, well,
landscape?
the first thing is just to get the athletes convinced, or to have an experience where they feel strongly they're in control of their brain, that they're actually in a state of flow. So we'll use devices where we're measuring brain waves essentially, and where we can show the athlete that this is when you were distracted. This is where you toned it down through biofeedback and you were able to get in a form of flow.
So you're using Muse for that?
We use
E-
Muse by Axon, yeah, and they have EE technology. We have the players formally do that. It doesn't take long, and they don't have to wear the device forever, because once they understand that they are meditating, they are in this specific state, they feel that what they're doing is beneficial. We've done, I can't say with the Galaxy, but at least with Toronto FC, and it will happen with the Galaxy. I just wrote up some documents for development within our academy where the technical staff and myself will start working on mindfulness practices. So everyone in the world is probably familiar with Phil Jackson just kind of lowering the lights when he with whatever team, the Lakers or the Bulls. This is a form for me of mindfulness where you're bringing your attention in a different way to what you're doing. Just engineering the environment that little bit can enhance a player's overall learning and experience. We'll be doing that with our academy, I think, this year, in the sense that instead of shouting instructions the entire time, maybe we're just asking the players to just pay attention to the sound the ball is making every time it's kind of passed or driven or received. And in doing that, the experience becomes something different and enhanced, I think, for the player. So again, for me, mindfulness is just this outstanding way of tuning into your environment, to your body, in a way that will better inform you as you grow with experience.
That's interesting. It's fascinating to hear. Mindfulness has become such a broad word in a sense. There's traditional mindfulness training, and then there's how it's applied. So it sounds like this is a little bit of a hybrid. Like, I've used Muse. I think Muse is really interesting. When I think about the neurofeedback I get in Muse with the soundscapes, I think of that as less traditional mindfulness, and the phrase that often surfaces for me is cognitive control. It's really training the ability to self-regulate. How busy is my mind? And can I get to that state where it's less busy, vis-a-vis less noise, less soundscape? but that's fundamentally different than what we'd probably consider a traditional mindfulness practice to be, where I'm just sitting and maybe using my breath as a point of observation, noticing my thoughts. So it sounds like we're really pushing mindfulness into this larger meta awareness of where you are at the moment, how you feel, and what you're noticing in order to just shift awareness.
Yeah, I think for me, at least when I work with our athletes, it's where is your attention, and understanding where your attention is and why is it there, I think is an important piece of what we're trying to do. The cognitive control piece is also important in that um, knowing that you can control it, that you're not subject to the whims of your brain. You control your brain, I think is an important piece. And it's at least in what I've written up, from our 13-year-olds all the way up to our 18-year-olds and then into our professional ranks, it's a project. It's time. It's not something, of course, this, that happens overnight, and it's not even something that happens in a year. With our 13-year-olds, I think I wrote, we're just introducing some things, and we're working on mind, heart, and breath awareness. Like this is where we are with meditation, and I wouldn't even say that that's necessarily mindfulness as much as just a broad awareness of these aspects. And then when we really get to start the learning phase, or where we really want players to take control of their skill acquisition, I think in the what I've written up anyway is then we see a more maybe traditional mindfulness approach of where us no, not traditional. What we would say is, where is your attention, where is your awareness, and how is it going to enhance what you're doing right now?
Well, I think that's great, and I think it's very powerful. I'm curious to know, because I see this in the work when I get to go to high schools and colleges. I mean, part of what we're battling, as we know, are these algorithms of attention. So you've got these young players coming up who I assume are very connected to their phones and probably pretty active on social media. So they're cultivating a different kind of attention. They're this sort of parsed attention, this constant feed. So do you find that they're generally receptive to these ideas, or is there sort of social media programming making it more resistant?
Well, I'll start. When I was in Toronto, the idea of meditation was in that frou-frou kind of, what do we do next? You know, just nowhere near even bringing up the term. Kind of, you had to be really careful how you frame. I felt like, yeah, I had to be really careful how I framed it. Now we have a Galaxy camp, which is just bringing all kinds of young school children to work on soccer, if you will, like a traditional camp. And when we introduce meditation there, it's like they've all been doing it already. They've all had it
Interesting.
kind of impacted some way, shape, or form, and they're ready to do it. I would say I shouldn't say they're ready to do it as much as they're accepting it to do it. The phones are a distraction, and we kind of use that as a tool of saying, who's in control right now, your phone or you? Do you know why you just swiped, or you're looking for something else? Like, you've just done this 7 times. Do you really know why you're doing that right now? So we kind of can use it as a tool of their distraction.
That's great.
And
Yeah,
that's,
that's what. Yeah, because even if you just become more aware of how you're engaging with social media, but you're now doing it from a place of awareness and not just a reflex, is a great starting point for that larger sense of self-awareness.
yeah. I think putting some rules and strategies around the phones, especially when they're in our environment, will be a key portion of it. But kind of getting them to be aware that this is what it's doing, and that casino in your pocket is not really designed for your benefit as much as the benefit of the casino. So
Right,
let's
right. Yeah,
be
the
aware.
casino's not trying to make you the best soccer player you could be.
I don't know how many times I've walked through the locker room prior to training and just said, the answer is not in the phone right now.
That's great. That's a great line. Yeah.
We have often.
What about breathing? You mentioned it earlier as its own technique. Another category of cognitive training, or training that's related to cognition, that's really increased in popularity. A lot of box breathing, lots of various different tools. What's your thoughts on that, and what do you implement, or what do you test these days?
Yeah. So in this area, we haven't we have 8 structures that we look at when we evaluate our players. Everything from technical, tactical, life. An area is cognition, but then also another area is called emotion. And emotion for us is kind of the awareness of your physiology. So a simple example would be you're tired, you're groggy, and when you're tired and groggy, perhaps you're a little more short or ornery with people, right? Like you know this, you know that inside you're feeling sleepy, and this might be one of the outcomes. So we look at sleep from the standpoint of changing our physiology, and we might use our breathing in ways that might enhance our sleep or our readiness to sleep. We might use breathing to activate or to increase our arousal, or we might use a breath or breath work to tamp down our current nervousness or anxiety. Um, Using breath work and getting our athletes to understand that in all of these ranges, from anywhere from changing your physiology to help you sleep to arousing your system to play a game, I think is the trick. And I think the breath work, along with the meditation and the biofeedback we get from what's going on in your brain when you're doing these different breath patterns, has been super beneficial for us.
So that's interesting. I assume when we think about breath work, we think about inhalation and sympathetic stimulation, exhalation, parasympathetic. So you're doing the classic sort of manipulation of phasing. So preparation for sleep, I assume, is longer exhalation phases. Preparation for being out on the field is emphasizing inhalation and sympathetic drive. Is that right?
Yeah. So a typical breath we might use prior to a game, because we're just trying to stay. We have 2 forms we'll use. If players feeling anxious, we'll use a physiological sigh. We just want them to feel a little more, I don't want to use the word relax, but less nervous
Less
is
nervous. Sure.
less what will be. And
And
then,
for and just quickly for those that aren't familiar with the concept of a physiological sigh, I think popularized by Andrew Huberman, it's this idea of taking a deep breath, filling your lungs, but then taking an additional inhalation to really expand all of the blood vessels in the lungs, flush out cortisol, and get an instant sense of stress reduction. Is that right?
and then the big blowout, the the outward blowout that really, it's hard to do. I find it hard to do, but doing that 2 or 3 times seems to change the physiology enough that players, whether it be butterflies or whatever it might be that they're specifically feeling at the moment, feel a little bit more, what I would just say, in control or ready to go or that kind of thing. We have players all the time inside our locker room now. I'm proud of them when they do it, who are just bringing in and bringing in and bringing in, not even physiological side, just trying to arouse themselves and bringing in and bringing in. And then if a player chooses to include breathing in their sleep routine, exactly to your point, where we are trying to exhale as much as we can and just trying. But I find, as much as the breathing itself for sleep, it's just the routine of it, just the conditioning your brain that you're going to sleep now.
Yeah.
And that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, I'm actually I've been sleep. I think, as you know, is a very passionate topic for me, as I'm now in my 50s and my family has a history of Alzheimer's, and we know that a lack of deep sleep puts you at high risk. And so I continue to explore. Off camera, I'll show you my latest sleep scores. I finally gotten my sleep score back up in the 90s on a daily basis, and I found, to exactly what you're saying, consistency and habit is the most powerful tool. I go to bed at 9, wake up at 5 every day, regardless of where I am when I travel as well. And all the other behaviors sort of become subservient to that.
Yeah, it's really, I was just going through this with a player the other day because he has included meditation in his sleep routine. I We were reviewing his next 2 weeks, and his next 2 weeks have him going away to a national team camp
Mm-hmm.
where he'll have to sleep with, uh, he'll be in the same room with a teammate. And I said, how comfortable are you going to feel meditating? Like, I know this could be, something. And so we've been working on strategies to do at home now what he'll do when he's on the road. And it's
That's
not like
great.
they haven't had this experience before. They go away to a tournament, they'll be staying with a roommate, they'll be in a room with somebody else.
Hmm.
But the behavior in the past has been, well, I'll skip it. I just won't do that part of my routine. And how'd you sleep? Let's look at your scores, or
Not as well.
let's look at your subjective scores and how did it look? Now let's look at your objective scores and how did it look? It's this constant using the data, but also their subjective experience. But, the question was, do you want to take a chance when you're with the national team where every day you have to be a top performer. You have to be at your best. So do you want to work on something else? And so introducing other breath work, or where could he do this, or how could he do this, or what would be the conversation with his roommate? Would he want to teach the roommate how to do it? Things like that, what we can possibly accomplish.
That's great. I think that's awesome. And hopefully it is getting easier, because as these practices become more common, hopefully these younger athletes have an opportunity to inspire others rather than having to hide. You don't have to hide your meditation practice, right?
No.
I mean, you always could. You could put headphones on and be like, dude, I'm just going to be listening to music and actually do your meditation. So there are ways. So we crossed over into sleep, and you mentioned data. I think based on our previous conversations, you haven't onboarded technically any of the sleep monitoring tools, Whoop, Aura, or any of the others. So is it an opt-in environment for the athletes? And then how do you manage that when you have some athletes that are using a tool and others that aren't?
So with the Galaxy, there have been experiments with Aura. I shouldn't say prescribed, but I've suggested, and we've given players sleep 8 mattresses. And then we also work with the athlete if they have the iWatch or whatever. So then it's an opt-in. It definitely is an opt-in. We don't have anything where it's mandatory that we're following their sleep. I've taken the approach of before we give them, say, a sleep 8 bed, where we're monitoring their subjective scores, like on a scale of 1 to 5, or, are you ready to go? Do you have to hit the alarm? Do you have to hit the alarm twice? Do you just not want to get out of bed? Like, what was your subjective when you wake up in the morning? Then once we start doing the sleep routine business, we're still comparing their scores. And then we go to the more objective data, say from a sleep 8 mattress or whatever it might be, where they're quantifying and giving you an actual score. Before they actually get a score, though, before they look in the phone for what that score would be, we ask them to subjectively say to themselves, I feel like I had a good night's sleep, or I had a terrible.
Yeah, you get to reflection before you get to data, right?
Yeah. And then we look at the data, and we'll spend, I don't know, a month looking at data and just kind of making suggestions on, well, what did you eat before bed? And did you have alcohol last night versus not? And just trying to get them to figure out how they can get their best sleep. I don't suggest, and I don't really ask them to even look at their sleep data on days of games, because I think there's some problems with that. And if they want to look at I just think that if you've had a good night's sleep, or you think you've had even a reasonable night's sleep, and then you look at the score and it says you sucked, right? Like, I had a player the other day said, Mike, I was in neurotrainer and the day before, and I had my top score, and I knew I was going to have a great game, and he scored the next day. And I thought that was great, but I don't like that. I don't like that thinking, right? Because it goes easily on the other side of things. So we can always look at the scores after the game, but day of the game, it's like, it is what it is. And are you going to be able to change your sleep score from the night before? So if you've done all the work leading up to this, you'll either know you had a bad night's sleep or not. And, you're still going to play the game, and we still need you to be at your very best.
At your best, right. Yeah, I think the readiness score is the same. I've had this conversation with athletes, coaches, as well as people on the measurement side in Aura. Yeah, what you don't want is to wake up on game day and see a really bad readiness score and let that influence your performance.
Yes.
Arguably, so much of readiness scores is based on HRV, and HRV is a little bit of a trailing metric. You could kind of cognitively navigate yourself to a point where you can say, yeah, well, that doesn't matter because I still have I still have whatever I need to be a great player. But in this cognitive optimization, you're looking for more positive reinforcement up to the point of taking the field. And yeah, I play that game. I wake up in the morning. How do I feel? How do I sleep? Most of the time I get it right. And occasionally, yeah, I get really mad. It's like, oh, I feel pretty well rested. I look at my score. I'm like, that's not right.
But the key is to always then ask the athlete or even yourself, do you really know the algorithm that's leading into that readiness score? Like, you
Mm-hmm.
don't know how heavily weighted Orr's algorithm is on HRV. Maybe it's up there now, but I know when I was investigating and trying to figure out, that
No,
was
no,
like
that's secret
top secret.
information. Yeah.
So unless you can, unless the that's the conversation I have with all the athletes. You don't know if your breath rate was scored to be 10x over your H rate. You don't know any of these things. So you take it with a grain of salt, but you really have to count on yourself, which is again maybe brings us back to meditation and awareness and mindfulness of if you know yourself, you'll be fine with these things. I think the devices are meant to, in our world, in the elite athlete world, is to make, say, somewhere between 2 to 5% um,
Refinement.
refinement or to enhance your performance. And if you get that, you're on the right track in professional sports. Like if Usain Bolt can run 2% faster or get off the line 2% better than everyone else,
That's a lot.
that's a lot. That's a sense what we're trying to get done in some of these areas.
Right. Right. So it's interesting. I love the web, right? There's a connectivity that sounds like you're really cultivating, which is tremendous for these players, especially these young players. Hopefully in years, flashing forward years ahead, they'll look back on it and understand how important this network of connectivity is. We obviously are very focused on cognitive performance, benchmarking cognition, improving cognition. Do most athletes in your program understand the relationship between cognitive performance and sleep? Not just physical performance, but is there a deep understanding of neuroplasticity really happens? The magic happens at night, and therefore that's one of the reasons you have to guard your sleep.
I think there's an understanding, not a deep understanding. If I'm being honest, I would say maybe it's 50-50 in terms of we're really, really connecting, say, sleep with learning, with performance. It's usually right now it's sleep and performance, right? There's not this consolidation that's going on when you're sleeping and that problems get solved when you're sleeping and your emotional health is better when you're sleeping because it changes the physiology. Some of the, I don't know if it's a mistake, but in our program, heavily based in neuroscience and trying to find objective numbers and using words like physiology along with cognition and not just, say, mental skills. Really being able to say there are things within you, chemically, biologically, that you can change, and it's not just wishing it well.
That's a really important delineation.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's the difference sometimes between mental skills coaches, sports psychologists, and I think the neuroscientists. I think that neuroscience is generally driven on more factual, really defined systems. And it's no slant against mental skills or sports psych. It's just a different
It's
way
just
to,
different. Yeah.
yeah. When I say routine, because I'm trying to impact physiology. If we impact physiology, you get to sleep faster. I don't know that the same approach happens with the other professions.
Yeah, I think that's very acute. I think the whole question of grounding it in science and using physiology as the bridge between neuroscience, which is still relatively new and obscure for a lot of people, but understanding that these are levers, these are actual levers that have a cause and effect. And the better we understand that cause and effect relationship, the more we can optimize the performance and make the right choices. That's terrific. So I'm curious, looking back, you've been doing this for a while. If you had an opportunity to have a quick conversation with your younger self when you first got to Toronto, Any words of wisdom you would have whispered in your own ear in order to help curate your path?
Besides, don't do it. Now, my career has been very rewarding, maybe a little bit longer. I think just the, I, I, I would have honed in on the individual athlete a lot quicker. I
Mm,
would have identified a small handful of athletes, whether they be the young ones coming in or just those who are generally genuinely curious. I would have honed in on individuals a lot quicker than I did, rather than trying to produce things that would impact the entire team, whether that be trying to influence coaches to implement some cognitive concepts. We have a great coaching staff. We've all worked together now for 11 years, and some of us for close to 15 years. I feel like a lot of the exercises that we do have baked in cognitive concepts already in them. So that's been, from that side, it's been great. But going to a coaching staff and trying to convince them that we should do group meditation, I wouldn't waste my time in there. I would find the individuals who generally um, were open minded to these types of things and start with that group.
and then just build advocacy from the group itself. So a little bit more build from the bottom up instead of trying to constantly convince the top and bring it
Correct.
down.
Yeah, and probably be a little bit. I would probably promote it a little more. I've been
Mm,
very quiet inside our walls about what I feel has been successful or where, you know, I feel like I want to have the concrete proof, and I don't know that I always have to have the concrete proof. I think sometimes we can go with, "Would you consider?" I think you said this once of, it may be best to ask a question rather than the statement, right? And so maybe, do you think that since he started meditation over 8 weeks ago, you've seen a change in his whatever it might be?
right. Whatever the
Because
behavior is that you draw a line to.
his emotional regulation. Um, and I think now we do that a lot more, but I think early on I would have maybe started there.
That's interesting. I think that'd be really helpful for people in this space because I think a lot of people fall into that trap that we think we have to get everyone convinced or we think we have to have total buy-in, and that in and of itself is it's a huge effort. As we go back to the earlier conversation, strength and conditioning took a long time, but when you can anchor champions and build advocacy, in some ways it starts to take care of itself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
All the sports are a little different too, right? Like
sure.
here I am with rosters of 24 to 26 people, first team, second team, same thing, 20 to 24 guys, an academy. If I were in a professional basketball environment, I don't know, the rosters are 12, 16. I'm not quite sure, but smaller, that intimacy of an individual, you're a little more in there with the guys. So all of it kind of reflects a little bit of the environment and what is valued. For sure, the Toronto FC and now the Galaxy have valued this work enough to make it important.
That's great. Last question. You look into the future of your career, your work. What do you want to get done? What do you want to accomplish in this space that you haven't accomplished yet?
Well, I'd like to see it move toward cognitive performance and away from mental skills. I'd 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 like to see that objective kind of data proof brought into it, and I would like to see it. I want to prove that training your brain is going to enhance your performance, and I like it to be as widely accepted as working on your bicep and working on the way you drive a ball. And I think it will get there. But we keep on hearing, we've heard it for years now. The brain is the final frontier when it comes to athletic performance. We've hit culture, we've hit the social things, we've maximized our, I think, physical capacity or understanding of that. We've maximized in so many areas, but this one specific area has been the last frontier. It feels like for at least the time that I've been involved in sport. And I just don't think it could be there. If you have a rehabilitation program for somebody with traumatic brain injury, the assumption is that you are teaching them skills, not just skills, but you're enhancing their current level of cognitive performance. You're trying to improve that. So if you can train an injured brain, you should be able to train a fully functional, healthy brain. and trying to get that to the forefront as a standard place that an athlete should go to every day is we're closest. I think we're closest, or we're closer than most.
Yeah.
I
So
think that
cognitive training being really part of an institutional cultural training program, it becomes non-negotiable. It's not an add-on. It's, of course, it's just as important as, and we point to all the other elements of training.
maybe taking it a step further in that it's just not an institutional or a team mandate.
Mm,
Individual athletes would say, if I want to be in the upper echelon, this is something I'm going to have to do. We have
that's
athletes
great.
who don't want to be in the gym, but yet they're going to be in the gym because they know without it, they're probably not going to be at the top of their game. And so to bring it down to the individual would be it'd be helpful. It's helpful when the institution firmly believes in it and puts resources in place. I think that's the starting point. But to get the individuals to really say, this is it, that would be the ultimate.
That would be fantastic. Taking it even a step further, it would be you're trying to recruit a player, but the player says, "I'm not going to come over there unless you have a cognitive training program that meets my standards."
Yeah. I mean, it's an excellent point. Because now we see athletes with entourages, right? They have their own nutrition, they have their own mental performance coach, they have their own. I think the trick for me is to, a little bit more on the neuroscience cognitive side and less on the sports psych and mental skills side of things. Although they might be the same in some ways in what we're actually doing, but I think a little bit different.
Yeah, that's great. Wonderful. Well, Michael, it's always a pleasure. It's always great to hear your journey and your insights, and congratulations, because you really are at the forefront here in the United States. Hopefully you're going to finish the season strong and with empirical proof that brain training creates better athletes. Be good for all of us. No pressure, Michael, but we're all looking at you to get it across the finish line.
Thanks for having me, and thanks for being a great partner in all that we're doing with the Galaxy. It's been great.
It's an honor.